Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. This is Dr. Garais, BIO112, Anatomy and Physiology 1. And we're now going over chapter 11. I think the start. All right, this is the nervous system part 2. And we already know the central nervous system is important. It's vital to your survival. It controls sensation/perception, and I believe I mentioned the difference between sensation and perception. Sensation is what you're feeling, but the perception is your brain's interpretation of what's going on. Movement, of course, thinking, and the brain is cut into two sides, and they're called hemispheres. You have the left side and the right side, and there's three parts: diencephalon, brainstem, and cerebellum. This is not as important to the parts that we're about to talk about and their functions. Okay. Now, of course, the central nervous system consists of the brain and spinal cord. End of list. Everything else is peripheral nervous system. Okay, so that includes your spinal nerves, not your spinal cord, but your spinal nerves and your cranial nerves. And the cranial nerves are also big. Hint, hint, they're big for exam questions as well. Meninges are the covering of your brain, and they're consisted of three layers: dura mater, arachnoid, and pia. The dura is the outer tough layer. It also contains the epidural space, so it's the space in between the dura and the arachnoid. The arachnoid matter, it's called arachnoid because it like spider-like or web-like, and that contains cerebral spinal fluid. And lastly, the innermost delicate layer, that's your pia mater, that contains all your blood vessels and the nerves connected to your brain, and that nourishes the central nervous system. It also is utilized as a kind of like biochemical monitoring system as well for your central nervous system. Here is a diagram, and you could see the separations. And you could see also the protections of, you got your skin, you have your flat bone, which is your cranium here, right? And then you have the arachnoid space, which is here, and then the dura, which is this light blue all the way out here, which houses this area right here. Now, the innermost layer, right, all the way on, it goes all the way. This is the outer layer, the middle layer. Well, this innermost layer, this orange here, that's your uh, pia mater. And mater means mother. So it's protective of the brain. But if you get meningitis, inflammation or infection of the coverings of your brain, you're in a lot of trouble. You're most likely highly infectious. So, again, like I mentioned in class, if you don't really need to be in the room, don't be in the room. Next, ventricles. Ventricles are these big rooms in your brain that house the cerebral spinal fluid. There are two lateral ventricles and then a third and a fourth that make four of them. So you have two lateral ventricles here, and then you have a third here in the middle, and then a fourth. You have an interventricular foramen that connects the lateral ventricles, and you can see here the cerebral aqueduct connects the third ventricle to the fourth ventricle. All of this is continuous on through the cerebral spinal fluid that's in your spinal cord. Inside the ventricles of your brain, of course, they're lined with ependymal cells. The ependymal cells form a tissue called the choroid plexus. All of that is to make cerebral spinal fluid. All right, the choroid plexus, right? Okay. And there's a decent amount of fluid in there, but it should be maintained, and it gets circulated, as you could see here, about 140 cc's or so. If you have too little, it becomes a problem. Too much, you got hydrocephalus, it becomes even a bigger problem. Let me see if I can. Nope, I can't. You can also see here, let's go back because I've jumped the gun a little bit. You could also see here how your brain is encased in fluid on top of being protected by your skin, top of being protected by your cranium here. It's encased in fluid, and the brain's kind of like floating in there. And, so when you hit your head, it doesn't hit the brain directly. Again, like I always, I'm a proponent of the theory that this is all engineered. It's made somehow. But our concern is the parts and how the parts work together. And we already know this is all the physiology of it. Of course, sensory, perception, motor. And now we're going to talk about the higher mental functions, such as memory, reasoning, judgment, coordination of the muscular movement. If you notice when you move your hand, it moves smoothly. If you have Parkinson's disease, you'll have something called cogwheel rigidity, which makes your movements very very shaky. Okay. And of course, visceral, your autonomic nervous system. And then all that go as well, because personality is also in there as well. You have three parts of your brain. You don't need to know this, but just know that there's a front part, middle part, and a back part. Your forebrain, midbrain, hindbrain. They're known as the prosencephalon, mesencephalon, and rhombencephalon. And the front part of your brain, well, it's better just to go over them. Let's look at previous pointer screen. Maybe, no, it doesn't work for my Mac. Well, maybe you can increase it on your screen. You have these bumps, they're called sulcus, singular, sulci, plural, and these grooves called gyrus. I mean, backwards. The grooves are called sulcus or sulci, plural, and the bumps are called gyrus or gyri, plural. And that helps, have more tissue. And just a little side note, I may or may not have mentioned it in lecture. People who are geniuses or people who utilize their brains are a little bit heavier, and the sulci and gyri are a little bit more robust or thicker than your average human being. This is the thing that connects the left and right hemispheres. I think I forgot to mention that in class. That's called your corpus callosum. You have your thalamus here, which is the gateway of all your sensory. So you don't sense every single thing. I mean, of course you do, but your brain doesn't pick up every little thing or you'd go crazy. And actually that's also one of a lot of theories with a lot of mental disease and defect. So your thalamus here, its function is to, like kind of filter out everything and only give you what you need. Pineal gland, that has to deal, uh, it's a some say it's a vestigial organ, and it also deals with your circadian rhythm, like how you get jet lagged, how you know if it's day or night, morning or evening, that kind of thing. Hypothalamus, area right here, underneath the thalamus, that is the area that deals with all homeostasis. Okay. Um, You have your pituitary gland. What else is here? Pons, that's respiratory. Your medulla oblongata here, which deals with the coordination between respiratory and your breathing. I mean, I'm sorry, respiratory and your cardiovascular. And cerebellum is here, also known as your arbor vitae or tree of life. If you look here, it kind of, me, it doesn't look like tree of life. It looks like broccoli to me. But hey, to each his own. So cerebrum, of course, sulci, gyri, ridges or the convolutions or the grooves are called gyri, and the ugh, backwards again. Sulci are like the grooves, and the gyri are the bumps. Corpus callosum connects the left and right hemispheres. And remember, I talked about in class, like, you know how people say it's left side's the artistic side and the right side's the mathematical side, or vice versa. I never remember what's what. But in actuality, both need to be connected so that both work kind of together. This is a really, really big slide here, um, especially for your future anatomage stuff and laboratory stuff. You have your frontal, which is here, parietal, which is behind it, and you got a pair of them on top. Occipital lobe in the back. Again, this is your arbor vitae or your cerebellum, and your temporal lobe here. Now, all of those things have functions. And if you jump ahead, this is just once you get down to with knowing your lobes, knowing that this is frontal, this, this, and this parietal, occipital, and this part here temporal. Pons is here in the brainstem, and here is your medulla oblongata down here. Now, if you look at the frontal, its function is concentration, planning, and problem solving, judgment. That's your frontal. Your parietal, if you look at the central sulcus, which is right here, it has the coordination between your motor, area 1, 2, and 3, and the rest of your sensory. Your occipital lobe back here deals with visual images. You have a frontal eye field here in the frontal, but the true interpretation and visual recognition of what you see is back here. And your temporal is here, and your temporal lobe deals with hearing. And if you look here, there's Wernicke's area and Broca's area here. Do you notice how it's very close to your hearing? Because how do you speak? You heard something before. So if we ever ask about Broca's area or Wernicke's area, it has to do with speech. Okay. And it makes sense that it's close by your temporal lobe, which deals with auditory processing. And here specifically is auditory area, which coincidentally is right by your ear. Not coincidentally, but accidentally on purpose. How's that? Oh, areas of the cortex, cutaneous, Wernicke's, sensory speech, right? And deals with language. And Broca is also deals with language. You have visual and taste and nice to know. Frontal lobe, parietal lobe, this must know. Okay. Area 1, 2, 3, that's primary motor areas. Broca's whoopsies. Broca's area, right? Muscles needed for speech. So Broca's and Wernicke's looks like a beautiful both A and B. Now you have dominant and non-dominant hemisphere. If you are right-handed, your dominant hemisphere is your left. If you're left-handed, your dominant sphere is your right. And the reason for that is because there's something called the decussation of fibers. The fibers from the left cross over to the fibers of the right. And if you recall the lecture, it's all about balance. If you hurt your right side of your head or your right side of your brain, you don't want your right side of your body also affected. So whoever built us smart and made the decussation of fibers and crossing over the fibers. Now you're non-dominant, all the other things, verbal, musical, visual, when they say the artistic part. But because of the corpus callosum, that one little band of white matter that's in your brain that connects your left and right, your dominant and non-dominant hemispheres should be working together. And you will definitely have problems if you can't do either. You have your pons here, medulla oblongata here, third ventricle, and all this other stuff. Hypothalamus and thalamus, very important, right? Here's your thalamus, hypothalamus, and again, thalamus is the gateway of your sensory. It's kind of a filter for all your senses. So you only can, interpret the things that are important. And your hypothalamus deals with all homeostasis activities. And here you go, right here. Limbic system, which is right above your corpus callosum, deals with your emotions and deals with your not only emotions, also deals with a little bit of your personality. Why did I say a little bit? A lot of it. Oh, this brainstem, this here, your cranial nerves, midbrain, cerebral aqueduct. We talked about this. Corpora quadramina. We didn't talk about red nucleus. You don't need to know about that just yet. Pons, we already talked about. Regulation and rhythm of breathing, very important. Medulla oblongata, you could see a whole bunch of things, but the big one is what? Cardiac respiratory control. It coordinates your heart and your lungs. Okay. Reticular activating system, or the reticular formation, which is here near your medulla oblongata, deals with your what do you call that? And I mentioned also the thalamus is a gateway of your sensory. Well, your RAS also filters sensory information. Okay. Now, the thing about the RAS is if it decreases in activity, you get sleepy. Types of sleep, non-rapid eye, non-REM, and REM. The important is one is REM. In REM, that's where dreams occur. And what are actually dreams? Dreams are your brain's way of processing. Remember, we talked about the thalamus, the gateway of the sensory, and your RAS that has filters it further. All that information that you're getting right now while you're awake has to be organized, and that's why you have to sleep, right? Because if you don't, it doesn't get organized, and also bad things happen if you don't sleep. Okay. Another thing that happens at REM sleep or stage 4 sleep is paradoxical sleep, right? Your brain, you're asleep and you have little to no tone in your body, but your brain, there are parts of your brain that are very active. Now, the cerebellum, that was the arbor vitae. And again, another sensory information integration center. So you have now the thalamus, which is the gateway. Then you have the RAS, which is the secondary filter. And then you have further integration in your cerebellum. Another thing that the cerebellum does is coordinates your muscles, because remember you have your antagonist and your agonist and your antagonist. Remember, during flexion, your bicep has to flex. Well, your cerebellum coordinates all your synergists and and it relaxes your antagonist muscles, like your triceps when you flex, and it also maintains posture. So remember what I mentioned in class. Even if you're sleepy, you're still sitting up in your chair. But if I make you totally unconscious by bopping you over the head with a hammer, right? I know that's a very brutal and very awful visualization, but if I make you unconscious, what happens to your posture? Your cerebellum isn't working, and then you'll fall to the ground. Spinal cord and your spinal nerves. Of course, your spinal cord, that's this thing, connected to your brainstem here. and brain and spinal cord, central nervous system, right? But what's sticking out of it? People have a picture of it. No, they don't. But we mentioned in class, and I showed you a picture of it, spinal nerves, and they're all coming out of here. So you have your spinal cord here, it's inside, housed inside your vertebrae, and when they start fanning out all your spinal nerves, it's part of your peripheral nervous system. And remember the term paralysis. Para means alongside, lysis means to break down. So if anything happens to these spinal nerves that run alongside your spinal cord, you will become paralyzed. This reflex arc looks just like homeostasis because that's what it does. Withdrawal reflex. Remember we talked about the burning on the stove. It's not only your hand that will move away from the heat or the danger. Everything else will move away. And it's all a reflex and it involves the interneuron located in your spinal cord because your brain doesn't have time to coordinate and think, hey, let's get out of here. Well, this withdrawal reflex is built in. And that's when I showed you the pictures of people who are scared. That's why your mouth automatically will go wide open so you can take in more oxygen. Your eyes will dilate and your eyes will open nice and wide so you could see all venues of escape. And that's the withdrawal reflex. Reflex requires the interneuron, which is here in the spinal cord, and does not require the brain until later, right? Until the signals eventually get up there. You have your sensory, and if you notice, your sensory goes into the dorsal or back part. This is called the dorsal horn of your spinal cord, and goes through the interneuron, and then from the interneuron, which is in your spinal cord, then it goes out to your motor, which is in the anterior portion or front portion of your spinal cord. So if you have an anterior spinal cord problem, you're going to have a motor problem. If you have a posterior or dorsal spinal cord problem, you're going to have a sensory problem. See? And this is the interneuron here, little thing right here, and you can see it. Oh, I mentioned ganglion earlier. It's just a big tuft or a big pack of nerves. So your spinal nerve comes out, and then it ends up in these things called a ganglion here. It's up like that. Cross extensor reflex, and know that ipsilateral, know the term ipsilateral and contralateral. If something happens on the same side, it's called ipsilateral. If something happens on the opposite side, it's called a contralateral problem. Here's another example. Peripheral nervous system, we mentioned cranial nerves, we mentioned spinal nerves. Now it's time to mention cranial nerves. Your somatic nervous system, it goes, your peripheral nervous system has the somatic nervous system and autonomic nervous system. We already know that. We also saw yesterday endoneurium, perineurium, epineurium. Endoneurium is the covering or the loose connective tissue that covers the inside of the axon, right? The perineurium covers what? The outside. And the epineurium is right on top of the fascicle of muscles or right on top of the nerve. And here's the example of it. And we also mentioned how a lot the nerve looks like the same organizations as muscle. And it makes sense. Sensory, motory, mixed nerves. All your cranial nerves are from your brain, but they're part of your peripheral nervous system and not part of your central nervous system. Same thing with your spinal nerves. The cranial nerves, they're numbered Roman numeral 1 through 12. All right. Some are sensory, some are motor, some are mixed. But you look at the chart, the last thing that we did in lecture, you need to know if I give you the number in Roman numerals, you should be able to tell me the name of the nerve. If I give you the number, you should be able to tell me if it's sensory, motor, or both. Okay. And is it sensory, motor, of both of what? And if you recall, you made a chart also in your homework and in your lab work as well. So it goes, let's go over right now how and my helpful tips on how to remember all these classifications or all these cranial nerves. There's 12 of them. So Roman numeral 1, when you look at it, it's 1. How many noses do you have? You only have 1. And the sense of smell is olfactory. Therefore, it has to be sensory. How many eyeballs do you have? You have 2. That's your optic nerve. Also sensory, because what do you do with your 2 eyeballs together? It's vision. Therefore, it's optic nerve. Now, you see this ocular motor, trochlear, and abducens? There's 3, 4, and 6. Put them all together because they're motor. What do they motor? What do they control? They control your extraocular muscles of your eyeballs. That's it. Ocular motor, trochlear, and abducens. 3, 4, and 6. Do I have to memorize all this other stuff? No. 3, 4, 6. Primarily motor controls the extraocular muscles of my eyes. Boom. That's it. Trigeminal. Remember, I put my 5 fingers on my face. I slap my face. Why? So I can feel it. Also, I started chewing because I can control it. And that's your maxillary and mandibular division. It goes, and your cranial nerve 5 controls all those motor and um, um, motor and sensory of your jaw and the area around it. Number 7 is your facial. So you think what? Now slap the front of your face. You slap your face. Can you feel it? Sure. And also, you're going to make a face. You're going to be upset. And that requires muscles. How do we know? When you get a stroke and it affects your facial nerve, you have drooping or what they call drooping facies or ptosis of your face and facial muscles. So facial is, of course, mixed. Remember, 5, 7. I slap myself on my jaw or the side of my cheek. That's 5. I slap myself in the front of my face. That's 7. And I'm lucky to have my face. Next, 8. If you draw an 8 on your ear, you know that your vestibular cochlear nerve, you not only hear things with your ear, you guys, some of you who've ever had ear infections know you get dizzy when when you have an ear infection. So your cranial nerve 8 is sensory, but it does 2 things. It does balance and it does hearing. Cranial nerve 9, it's mixed, glossopharyngeal. Glosso means tongue, pharynx means your throat. So you have, you have motor fibers to control swallowing, and you also have sensory because you can feel things on your tongue, right? So that's what glossopharyngeal. 9, 10. Cross your heart. You make an X on your heart, and that's your vagus nerve. Okay, and it deals with autonomic stuff in your cardiovascular. Number 11, accessory, and is I don't know. I had a hard time trying to figure out how can you remember 11. 11 is primarily motor, and its impulses to the muscles and back. And remember, I hunched over and I was moving my shoulders, so that's what motor. And last but not least, hypoglossal. I mentioned that the tip of your tongue or the top part the visual part of your tongue that you see in the mirror is the tip of the iceberg. There's the rest of the muscle underneath it. Therefore, the hypoglossal nerve controls your tongue and tongue movement, and that is primarily motor. All right, that is chapter 11 lecture. Hit up these cranial nerves daily. There's going to be 2 or 3 of them that are going to come out on the exam. Okay. And the ones I like are what? The common ones: 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6, 7, 8. Right? Those are the more common ones. But I fair game that I could ask anything else. Spinal nerves, and we went over how this is called the dermatome, how the spinal nerves, how they their innervations spread out. Now, autonomic nervous system, we gotta talk about that, and then we can wrap it up. I was too quick to to wrap it up. Now you have a comparison here that sounds alike. Sympathetic nervous system, it goes, and parasympathetic nervous system. Sympathetic nervous system is fight or flight. That means what? Your heart rate's going to go up, your respiratory rate's going to go up, and your pupils will dilate. Because why? This is an emergency. It's stressful. If I'm in a fight, I need my pupils nice and wide and open so I can see all the punches coming. If I'm in flight, running away from my neighbor's pit bull, um, uh, I need all the oxygen I can get. So increased heart rate, increased blood rate, blood pressure, and of course, my pupils are fully dilated because I need to see all the venues of escape. Now, the parasympathetic nervous system is the exact opposite. It's going to rest and digest. So what do you do when you rest? Blood pressure goes down, respiratory goes down, and when you digest, you get hungry, right? So this is under resting. So you can't really enjoy yourself, you can't enjoy a meal if your heart rate is up, blood pressure is up. So everything else is the exact opposite of the sympathetic nervous system. So know those things, know those signs and symptoms, and recall that we utilize a lot, especially in the emergency department, the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system divisions to diagnose a lot of things. Okay? So again, take two. That's it. I will see you guys in class, and thanks for playing.